Today, has the government broken its word over EU laws? Interest rates reach a 15-year high. And should people accused of rape be tried without a jury? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Bob Seely, Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves, journalist Ella Whelan and Times Radio's Charlotte Ivers. Today, this is what Rishi Sunak promised to do to thousands of EU laws. Now the government's changed tack and some Tory MPs aren't happy.
Secretary of State, what on earth are you playing at?
The fact is, I went in and looked at the detail and I decided that this was the best way to deliver it.
The Bank of England has just raised interest rates to their highest level in almost 15 years. It'll make borrowing more expensive for people like him.
It's frustrating and, you can get frustrated by it, but you just can't let it dwell.
So when will rates stop going up? Also today, in last week's local elections, it was easy being Green. Has taking some blue councils really changed the political landscape? The man who won the Green Party's first ever council from the Conservatives tells us how he did it. Welcome. Let's start with this headline in The Times. Flying the nest is for the birds. Half of under 25s live at home. Yes, this is due to recent census figures that have just been released, saying that more than half of those aged 24 or under in England and Wales still live at home. And many are too poor to strike out on their own. Does that mean, or should it mean, Bob, that 25-year-olds should be living elsewhere?
Look, it'd be great for people who want to live at home to stay at home, and if you want to live outside home, that's your choice. I think it's important here to get some facts out. Last year, there were 400,000 first-time buyers, and that is the best figure that we've had for 20 years. We've built something like 2.2 million homes since 2010. We've helped over 800,000 with right-to-buy schemes, and we built over 626,000 affordable homes.
But you did oppose, of course, mandatory housing targets for local authorities.
Yes, to give greater leeway and greater local democracy.
But it probably means fewer homes.
I disagree,
mean, the number of
Joe.
families... Well, we'll come on to it in a minute. Number of families with adult children at home rose by more than 13.5% over the decade to nearly 3.8 million. I mean, the figures are very stark. I mean, Ellie, should kids have left home by the time they're 25, if they want to?
Well, look, I mean, my youngest is 3, so if these figures are correct, then I'll be close to drawing my pension by the time he moves out. But in all seriousness, we're in a housing crisis, and the response from the government is to scrap housing targets. Labour would give first dibs to first-time buyers who want to buy their own home, would introduce a permanent and comprehensive mortgage guarantee scheme, and also reform the private rented sector. We've been promised a renters reform bill time and time again. At the moment, people can be evicted with little notice through no fault of their own. All of these things need to reform, and that's what Labour would do if in government.
Should kids, young people, have left home by the time they're 25?
Yes, I don't know many 25-year-olds that want to be living at home. I mean, all the things that are part of adult life, inviting people back after you've been out, having relationships, managing your own finances, feeling like you've got a space to your own is incredibly important for adult development. But the answer to this is it's the simplest, easiest thing. It's just build houses. Build houses. There's been, you've already mentioned the scrapping of the targets, but we haven't been ambitious in terms of house building since directly after the Second World War. The numbers under New Labour were in the low hundreds of thousands.
No, it's really not since Macmillan.
Yeah, the Conservatives have a problem because they won't admit, which is that none of their voters want them. They're a party full of NIMBY voters and supporters, so they're not going to touch that with a barge pole. And OK, the Labour Party's committed to something around the 300,000 mark, but I would double, triple, quadruple that in terms of what we actually need. You do not need a kind of PhD in this to know that the problem is put more bricks in the ground.
Why is it? I mean, you're young, both of you. Probably over 25, but not much more than 25. Do you think people should have left home by then?
think if people want to, and most 25-year-olds I know absolutely would want to, then they should have been able to leave home. And I would just echo what Ella said, really. We haven't been building houses in this country for a long time. When you see policies coming from the government, purported policies, proposed policies, they tend to be on the demand side. You tend to have, I don't know, an extension of Help to Buy being touted. Well, OK, all very well and good, but if you don't have an increase in supply, that's just pushing house prices up again, and that doesn't get us very far.
Right, very briefly, because we'll come back to this.
Charlotte makes a really good point there. One of the big problems is not the fact that councils don't give permissions, it is that the top 10 developers who hold 70% of permissions don't build out. There are 900,000 outstanding planning permissions in the UK, and one of the things that the so-called NIMBYs want actually is to force the developers to build more of their permissions.
I know, but it hasn't happened, has it? It
No,
hasn't happened
we've
up
got
until
to
now,
make
and
it
as I
happen.
say, we're
That's
going to
the
come
point.
back to it, because actually if things are difficult enough in terms of trying to get onto the housing ladder, then it's been quite challenging for people who have mortgages. We've just had the latest interest rate rise from the Bank of England. It's gone up, as expected, from 4.25% to 4.5%. Let's get the latest with our economics correspondent, Darshini David. What does this mean for everyone, Darshini?
Well, Joe, it's a tricky one, isn't it? We all know that prices are up on average by 10% over the last year. It's really painful choices being made, but actually combating inflation includes some very painful action, because what we've seen, as you say, that increase in interest rates is going to mean instant pain for 1.4 million households who are on variable or tracker rate mortgages. Those monthly payments up on average by between £15 and £25. There's a further 1.8 million households who are coming to the end of fixed-rate mortgage deals this year. They're having to remortgage, and that's where the real sticker shock comes in, because those interest repayments will have at least doubled compared to what they're used to. So there's more pain in store. Why are we doing all this? The Bank of England says inflation has stayed higher for longer than it had expected. So this is the highest, as you say, in 15 years. And by the signs we're getting from the Bank of England, this isn't going to be the last increase in interest rates either.
Right. So you think it will continue to go up. Now, Labour, as you know, Darshini, are blaming higher mortgage payments and then therefore increases in interest rates on the fallout still from the mini-budget during Liz Truss's brief administration. Is that true?
Well, we all remember, don't we, Joe, those vertigo-inducing days of looking at how the rates on fixed-rate mortgages soared during the time of Liz Truss in number 10. But just to quote the Governor of the Bank of England himself, that sort of risk premium, if you like, that added bit that markets slapped on to the expected cost of borrowing and therefore got reflected in those mortgage rates has all but evaporated. What we're looking at now are still higher rates. You're taking out a fixed-term deal because of what's currently happening to interest rates, because of what's happened to inflation, and because of what's expected to happen to interest rates because of that domestic picture. But that sort of riskier outlook for growth, for inflation that we had in that era has gone away. So that little bit extra has gone, but yes, we're still looking at a pretty painful picture.
Darshini David, thank you very much. I mean, we've just talked about cost of living in the fallout from the local elections, which were very poor for the Conservatives. Listening to this again, how does an increase in interest rates help people with cost of living?
Look, it's incredibly painful. Everyone's mortgage is going to go up, including mine. And you know, everyone watching this programme is probably going to be paying higher mortgages. The answer to that is we've got to get inflation down. And that's why I know that some people are striking because they want inflation-busting pay rises. We need to get inflation, the cost of living down for everybody, because every time everyone goes to the shops, they're paying more until we can get inflation down. Our aim is to halve it. Hopefully we're going to be doing that by early next year. I hope this is, if not the last, then the penultimate interest rate rise. But we need to get inflation. We need to get the cost of living down for folks, for everybody. But that's why we're spending £94 billion in a support package on energy, on cost of living.
I'm going to come to you, Ellie, in just a moment. But listening to Bob, I mean, you could be potential Conservative voters or Labour voters, of course. Listening to what Bob has said, does it fill you with any reassurance?
No, it's really irritating to hear you use words like we and everyone as if this is sort of like this current economic crisis we're in at the moment is just something that happened like the weather and that we all just have to kind of chip in to make it right. I mean, it's short-sighted by Labour to suggest that this was all just down to Liz Truss's mini-budget, as bad as that was, because this has been a problem that's been years, decades in the making. And during the pandemic and the successive lockdowns, the government decides to print loads of money to tinker around with all the things that have caused inflation, and raising interest rates hasn't done anything to lower food prices. So basically, it's incredibly unfair that all the normal people at home are just being forced to pay for government inadequacies. So please stop using words like we and everyone and as if we're one big family doing this, because that's nonsense.
What's your personal experience then, Charlotte?
Well, I think it's essentially going to be no fun, and Bob has set out very clearly why that's going to be. And listening to you speaking there, it sort of reminded me of a very good article I read in The Economist a few weeks ago, which talked about the idea that people became Conservative voters not because they suddenly became very rich, but because living the lifestyle of a Conservative voter suddenly became very cheap. Money has essentially been free for the last 15 years or so. So you can get your house on a nice big mortgage. You can get your nice car on rental. You can go on your foreign holidays because you've got more disposable income. We've all been living these lovely lives, relatively speaking, because of the cheap availability of money. Now that is changing, and as Ella has said, there's a lot of debate about whether it should have changed a bit earlier. And if I was a Conservative MP, sorry Bob, I think I'd be pretty nervous about that.
What would Labour do? I mean, if you listen to Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England, he's actually said he's pretty sure his judgment would be that the sort of Liz Truss premium on that mini budget has pretty much gone now. We're back to where we were before and would be in sort of international comparisons.
But do you think of all those people that have come off fixed rate mortgages after that mini budget with those huge hikes in interest rate? I think sort of like the collective additional mortgage bill has been over £1 billion. So it has hit people. But the reality is this has been a low growth country for far too long under the Conservatives, and people feel as though they are worse off than they were 13 years ago. We haven't had the sort of growth that other comparable countries have seen. We haven't had that investment, and people do feel worse off. In the local elections, out campaigning up and down the country, people were saying they felt worse off. And where was the Conservative offer to them? We had a budget recently where the tax giveaway was for the richest 1%
But what's your offer? What's your offer? How would it change the situation right now?
Well, to start with, one of the things that we have said is that have a proper windfall tax on the energy companies, and that will pay for a freeze in people's council taxes, putting more money in people's pockets.
All right, I mean, you've talked about these billions.
Just a bunch of points, some party political, some quite serious. We have a 75% windfall tax already. Any more will shut down North Sea oil. We already half the £94 billion support package for every household, worth about £3,300 to every household.
Is inflation so high?
Is being paid.
Why
I'm going to come to that, Joe.
10% higher than other comparable countries.
Let me just come to that. That windfall tax is paying for half the support package for families for last year and this year.
Which is peanuts. It has to be said, for individual families. It's peanuts.
It's £3,300 per household. If you think that's peanuts, that's fair enough.
It is.
To answer your points about inflation, I think there are three reasons. Firstly, I don't think lockdowns were a success, and I think there are some big questions over it. But we spent £400 billion supporting families through those lockdowns, and we're paying for that now in tax and inflation. Secondly, I think look, there's an undoubted price hike which we're seeing globally caused by the Ukraine war and the sharp spike in energy prices, which is now coming down. Okay, and thirdly, it's not the most important reason, but I do think the Bank of England called cheap money and called the interest rates rises a little bit too late and didn't nip it into the bud. That's not the most significant reason, but if you're looking at three structural reasons, those for me are the three structural reasons why we are stuck with higher inflation, which we're seeing everywhere throughout Europe.
More than anyone else.
But a little bit more now, because we spent £400 billion on COVID, we're spending £94 billion supporting families.
Bob, we've heard it. Let's just have a look at this Rishi Sunak's leadership campaign video. Yes, it was rather eye-catching. Boxes of EU regulations dumped into a shredder, as you saw there. Rishi Sunak pledged to repeal all of them in his first 100 days as leader, but the government, as you heard in the headlines, has now ditched that plan. And this was Jacob Rees-Mogg, Conservative MP and former Minister for Brexit responsibilities, on the Today programme.
Politicians have not delivered, and this comes back to the Prime Minister's promise in his video during his leadership campaign when he said he would do this. Now, bear in mind, at that time, he had already given right round consent to the retained EU law bill. I had briefed him on it. He knew that it wasn't easy. He knew that it was going to be an effort to get it done by actually a slightly longer deadline at that point. He accepted the deadline of 2023, and then he has broken his word. And this is very serious in my view.
What's happened, Bob?
Well, clearly, it's a show. Look, I'm sorry we haven't delivered on our promises. I'm a big fan. In my military days before Parliament, I served in units, and our motto was basically you under-promise and you over-deliver. And I would love a government, any government, that actually under-promises and over-delivers or promises what it delivers. So I'm sorry that we haven't delivered on this. But my blunt answer is I trust Kemi that if she doesn't think we can deliver using the method she wanted, she is working to find another way of delivering on that promise. And I'm sure we will deliver on that promise. And I'm sorry it's taking a bit longer than I thought it was going to.
Well, it's going to take a little bit longer. But otherwise, are you reassured?
No, I don't think apologies, as nice as they are ever very reassuring in relation to this, because, you know, I think that video, re-watching that video from Sunak is like everything that this government is about at the moment, which is flashy kind of TikTok-y style videos and no substance.
Or some practical realism.
Because, you know, and by the way, this makes me sick because I was a very dedicated Brexit voter who has for a very long time, along with all the other Brexit voters, tried to argue that the promises that the government made about taking laws on our own books, into our own hands, the serious business of not just kind of like shredding everything in this nonsense way.
Ella, we're going to be doing it.
No, but
we're just taking longer than we thought.
But the problem is we don't have time today, even if we were on air for 24 hours, to pick apart the mess that has happened in relation to the EU Retained Law Bill. What happens is you have, you know, promises from the government, and then the Lords come in and say, no, we're not going to allow you to do that, we're going to thwart it. And then, you know, there's questions about how much power the executive have coming from an unelected Lords. The whole thing is, I think, keeps proving how right Brexiteers were, which is that democracy in this country is fundamentally sick and failing. And the depressing thing is that leaving the European Union doesn't seem to have solved very much of our own government's dedication to democracy.
But what you're seeing is a battle between two houses, one elected, one unelected. But actually, you can say that this is an example, whether we like it or not, of modern politics in action, that people argue over detail. It's taking longer. We will deliver.
One excuse. Come on.
Just
get it done. If you have expertise in the military, why don't you whip your own party into getting it done in time?
Nobody's given me a job.
You heard it here first.
I'm super happy just to be the MP for the Isle of Wight. It's the best place in the world. OK, but listen, I don't know what else I can do. I fessed up. I'm so sorry. What do you want me to do? Sit here squirming away like some Politico?
What do you want me to do? Say, there, it's all right. Yes. What do you want us to do? Sat at home and be like, oh, all right.
No, but I'm trying to provide a reason why we're doing it. It's taking longer than we thought. I'm sorry, but I think we're going to deliver. I hope that we're going to deliver. And Kemi is a fantastically competent minister, and she will find a way to deliver.
How difficult is this for the government?
I think it's tricky. I think we sort of all knew that we would end up here, to be honest. This has been something that the government has been warned about several times. It's going to cause some annoyance with their backbenchers. But fundamentally, the problem seems to have been that the civil service were spending all of their time trying to make this pledge, which is an important pledge. It's mainly a cosmetic pledge in many ways, in that it is proving a point that Brexit is done, when actually, as Kemi Badenoch was saying, what she should have been asking them to do is improving the regulatory environment for business, trying desperately to get some growth out of this country.
I mean, is Labour, are you supportive of what Kemi Badenoch is doing? She's going to take her time. She's not going to be held, she says, to a deadline until they have gone through all of these laws thoroughly.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. I mean, we welcome this, but we should never have got here in the first place. Months and months and months of parliamentary time has been taken up on this. Labour have said, you know, this isn't the right path to be going down. We have now had this U-turn. It yet again highlights the weakness of Rishi Sunak and his government. You know, looking at the statement today, all I saw was Conservative backbenchers having a pile on the minister. People are facing a cost of living crisis. People want to hear what the solutions to that are. Businesses want to know what the plan for growth is. And meanwhile, in Parliament, the Tory party are still fighting about Brexit.
Bob?
Well, what we're doing is trying to deliver on our promises, and we're going to be doing so. when it comes to the cost of living, we've got a 94 billion package.
You said that. I want to
support
talk
families.
specifically about this EU retained law. What I want to look at is some of the substance, Ella,
Jo,
because you say, I will come back to you, because
Yeah.
Ella has said it's a betrayal. Just get on and do it. But what is it precisely that you want done, Ella? Because it would have led, according to the Minister herself, consequences across swathes of businesses, the environment, workers' rights, consumer rights. I mean, environmental groups have been particularly concerned about a loss of rights and legal protection in areas including water quality, air pollution standards and protections for wildlife. Were you saying which laws did you want to keep, and were you saying, no, just get rid of them, whatever they were?
No, I was. I mean, I don't think many people were a fan of the the deadline was good in and of itself, that it sort of attempted to force government to get to it and get the work done. But there was the necessity to kind of rush this, and the imagery of shredding wasn't helpful, because there's some important stuff here, and making our own law is important. But what I reject is that the criticism from this comes that says that if we do this and if we did get rid of a load of EU law, what would happen is we'd be some kind of horrendously uncivilised country with no women's rights, no maternity rights, no workers'
Isn't that a
rights.
risk?
No, I think I have more faith in women, in workers, in people who, have the history
which laws
that
did
we
you want to
fight
get
for
rid
things.
of specifically? Were there areas of law that you just wanted to scrap that had been brought in by the EU, most of them with our cooperation?
Cooperation being the kind of contested word in terms of
and the laws you
democratically.
wanted to get rid of?
Well, there's a lot of stuff in relation to environmental regulation, which I think has held up things that we were talking about previously, planning permission for house building and things like that. There's some specifics around stuff that I'm interested in around the sale of infant formula, which, I mean, we don't have time to go into that. But the point is that enacting this kind of change was part of the Brexit promise, which was that we would be in control of our own laws. And if you look at other countries within the European Union, I mean, there's no evidence that, what the EU law is protecting pensioners in France, for example. It's like we always suggest that without EU law, we will become kind of barbarians. And I think
but
that's
which
not
laws
true.
would you like to get off? Because that is the question. If you want to sweep away all these protections, and maybe there's a reason for doing so, which ones?
OK, you make a really good point. There were two approaches to this. And initially, it was going to be, let's scrap everything because most of it's doubled up. We probably got the laws there in the first place. Since then, for whatever reasons, and it may be civil service cautiousness, it may be ministerial cautiousness, we've taken a different point of view that actually we can't just junk all this stuff
in
case there are some elements, and we don't want to therefore rush to make these new laws. So actually, Labour should be supporting this. We are taking our time to make sure we're ditching the duff laws and not throwing away stuff that may be valuable.
And what's wrong
so
with
we're not
that?
throwing away the baby with the bathwater.
Look, I think that it's really important that we get this right. I was an employment rights lawyer for years before coming into Parliament, and a lot of our employment law derives from the European Union. So a massive concern is this all just gets chucked out under a sunset clause without much thought given to then, what happens next.
So you're welcoming this?
So the point is that we've spent months and months and months of parliamentary time, as I said, discussing this, when we should be getting on with dealing with the cost of living. And now we've got
you have said you do back this in principle, and that there would be some laws perhaps that could be dumped.
Well, I mean, we need to look at the detail of that, but we've gone from 4,000 laws going to be disappearing to now civil servants being told to come up with 600, and all the while the Conservative Party are fighting amongst themselves. It's not good governance, and it's not good for our countries. Businesses have no certainty around what's going to be in and what's going to be out. Environmental campaigners are really concerned, trade unions are really concerned, and the government are just fighting with each other.
Well, and also civil servants, you will have heard in the clip we played earlier from Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's worried about civil servant influence here. The Guardian, stop calling us woke, lazy snowflakes, senior civil servant tells government. That is their response. You're smiling there, Bob. How do you...
It's not their response, it's somebody's response to The Guardian. Let's put that in perspective.
All right, well, how do you view civil servants? Have they been the blob? Is this a victory for the blob?
I think most civil servants I meet are actually really impressive, really smart people. I think there are one or two, think are
but that's the same, of
wrong
course,
about
in any,
politics.
in any
Look,
walk of
do
life.
I think you need strong management, strong leadership. You need to be respectful of other people. You need them to respect that you've got a minister, not only that you're Minister of the Crown, but you're actually pushing through a democratic agenda, agreed at a general election, signed off in a manifesto. Occasionally one has to change one's promises, sadly. COVID, the Ukraine war, etc. But there has to be an understanding. My worry is that if there's a them and us attitude between ministers and civil servants, it damages the civil service. So I hope the civil service, everybody in it, can cooperate with the government, because we are delivering on an agenda, and it's an important one for our country.
I mean, do you agree it doesn't help if you have ministers calling civil servants snowflakes or Machiavellian geniuses?
No, it's not helpful. And at the end of the day, the buck lands with and stays with the government. But I think sympathy among those of us who are watching programmes like today for the civil service is waning, because you can see, I don't know about snowflakes and woke and all the rest of it, although there is questions as to what kind of discussions are being had within the civil service around gender ideology and, questions around diversity training. But, we know that failures in relation to how, Windrush scandal was handled, how the departure from Afghanistan was handled, was at least in part down to things like civil servants working from home, there not being a kind of a coherent, proper working environment there, which maybe it's the fault of the ministers that they were working under it, maybe it's the fault of the atmosphere there, but something's going on. There's something to discuss at least.
How would you see the relationship at the moment between ministers, government and the civil service?
It's not great, and part of the reason why you can see in that headline. But I think so often in Westminster we get very fixated on personalities and who's up, who's down. And actually I think that often means we don't look at structures, and it's the structures that matter. And I think a lot about the structure of the civil service and the way that it lets the country down, really, because we like generalists, we like to move people around a lot. It's sort of almost seen as a failure if you stay in the same policy area for several years in the civil service. Then we have these big structures. You don't get the subject matter expert often briefing the minister. You get their boss's boss's boss. There's so much that could be done, but instead we're just calling them woke snowflakes and not actually focusing on that.
A good point to move on and talk about the Green Party and their success, relatively speaking, at the local elections on Thursday. We can show you a graph showing their support, but they were certainly celebrating after this set of results because it was their best ever. You can see certainly in the last few years support for them, and the percentage of seats won in election results in England, local elections that is, has steadily gone up since 2015 and has reached its height in 2023. They're not, and they didn't in this particular set of elections, just take seats from Labour in urban areas. They actually won quite a lot of support in rural Conservative areas, traditional Conservative areas. Let's talk to the Green Party leader designate of Mid Suffolk District Council. It's the first time the Greens have held a majority on a council. Andy Mellon, congratulations to you. You have sole control of an English council for the first time. Were you surprised that you won?
Oh, we've seen this coming quite a long way out. We had our first council elected here in 2003, and we've constantly increased that number. So, we expected this. We didn't quite expect the size of the majority that we ended up getting, but very pleased with it anyway. Yeah.
What were you hearing on the doorstep?
Well, all sorts of different things. But, people seem to, have an appetite for the kind of sensible, practical policies that our candidates were talking about. And, there was a lot of warmth and enthusiasm about the sort of things they want us to do. Right. So you're saying it was a positive vote for the Greens, not just a protest vote against the Conservatives in your area? Certainly not just a protest vote. I mean, we took 57% of the vote here in Mid Suffolk, and we've got 24 out of the 34 councillors. I mean, of course, the national, sort of picture sort of feeds into the local as well. But, where people have voted for a Green and got a Green in the past, they've liked it and they've wanted more. People have already got a taste for their Greens here. Right. And is that because you've become a sort of middle-class party, certainly in your area? Say we're middle class particularly, but we people in Mid Suffolk are pretty sensible, and they like the sort of the policies we've been putting forward. Those have gone down well. Right, we'll talk about some of the individual policies in just a moment. Well, listening there to Andy, they like their Greens, to coin a phrase, in Mid Suffolk. Are you worried?
Yeah, I like my Greens, but not politically. I would just say, Andy, well done. I mean, I don't know if you are a protest vote or not, because I haven't seen your local agenda. Tell me, are you going to be as bad at recycling as the Greens were in Brighton? Because the Greens seem to be too busy saving the globe to actually do any recycling. Brighton had one of the worst recycling rates in Europe, bizarrely. So are you going to do recycling better because you've inherited it, a really strong performance from the Conservatives, or are you actually going to do it competently?
Andy?
Well, I mean, our recycling rates here in Suffolk are pretty high already.
Okay,
we think we can do better. We're actually waiting for the government to come out with their latest set of, suggestions in terms of how we can increase recycling and have the same sort of system right across the country. That was delayed, I think, before the local elections, and that needs to come out, and we need to see what they're planning.
We'll come down to the Isle of Wight, because our domestic recycling, under a Tory leadership 12 years ago, we put it in place, has got 98% recycling, and we safely incinerate the 2% and use it for electricity, and we're about to use it for steam for our hospitals. If you come down and want to see best practice, come to the island.
Right, well, there's an invitation. Yeah, but why do you think people turned away from the Conservatives in
protest? Look, I mean,
you think it's a protest vote?
Yeah, look,
I mean, you've heard Andy saying it's a positive.
Again, I will, be absolutely honest about this. We governed badly. We didn't govern as well as we should have last year. We got punished. And actually, we're doing a much better job now under Rishi's leadership. And hopefully we're going to deliver on our 5 promises by early next year. We'll set out an agenda for the long term. And people can choose between a government that's actually getting on and delivering, or Keir Starmer, who changes his mind on pretty much everything every week.
Right. Well, what about Labour? Why didn't you actually capitalise on... It might have been a protest vote. It might have been a positive vote for the Greens. Labour didn't maximise out there, did it?
Well, if you look what happened in Brighton and Hove, for example...
Different area. This is a more urban area. It
is a more urban area, but if you look what happened there, the Greens had a minority administration, 20 councillors. I think they've gone down to 7 or 8. Labour is now in control of Brighton and Hove Council. And I think, on the doorstep, people are listening to Labour's green agenda, the Green Prosperity Plan, the plan to insulate 19 million homes, tripling solar energy, moving to renewable energy by 2030, the Great British Energy Company.
We've heard the manifesto at the time of the local elections, but yes, I hear you. Charlotte, is this a big challenge, do you think, this set of results for the Greens, that people have got more of an appetite for the Green Party, certainly locally?
Certainly locally, they do seem to, particularly in the southeast of England. And it's fascinating watching it, actually, because you've got all these Conservative MPs who were sitting, some still are sitting on these massive majorities, these really safe seats. And they're all panicking now about the Greens and the Lib Dems. And to be honest, it makes me a bit nervous, because what a lot of these MPs are seeing and saying is that this is because they are building too many houses, and people are voting Green because they are unhappy that somehow the Conservatives are building too many houses. So I'm worried we're just going to get even fewer houses built now.
I'll come to you. Well, Andy, do you want to respond to that? Because that is the accusation. Anti-growth party, Green Party opposing plans for housing developments in your area.
Well, we certainly didn't stand on a kind of NIMBY agenda, but there's certainly a feeling in communities here that, planning is something has been done to them rather than with them. And we certainly want to involve people much more in the process of deciding where homes are built. And people are much more positive about them.
We do have a housing crisis now. It almost feels like it is time for some sort of special measures. It almost feels like we do just have to push things through. I know people don't want lots of houses built in their local area, but people have to live somewhere. And I almost think we have to just say, OK, let's rip it all up. Let's have some targets.
OK. Andy, well, now I'm going to get Andy to respond, and then I'll come to Ella. Andy?
Is it a housing crisis or more an affordability crisis? That's my question. Yeah,
and both would be improved by building more houses.
And certainly building more social homes. And that's something we're going to be doing here in Mid-Suffolk within the constraints that the government allows us to do, which we would certainly lobby to change.
Ella, are you a fan?
No, I'm not a fan. I mean, the fact that we started off by a kind of row about recycling, I think, tells you everything you need to know about the Green Party, which is, you characterised it, Joe, as a middle-class party, the anti-growth party. I think that's generally what most people see, which is at a time when you have an energy crisis, a time you have a cost of living crisis, the Green Party's main narrative, if I can sort of, paraphrase it, is we need to do less to save the planet. We need to consume less. We need, it's anything in relation to making people's quality of life.
Conservatives liked it, and I didn't quite characterise it, but I said that's what people are saying. saying about the Greens' success in terms of being a middle-class party or an anti-growth party, but Tories liked it there.
Yeah, in that particular area, I think this is where the story in Brighton tells quite an important story, which is that in Brighton and Hove, you have much more working class voters who, are not going to be particularly happy with a party that comes along and says, have you washed out your tin of beans and put them in the right box, rather than talking about building houses or getting more jobs, all the rest of it that is meant to be about growth and making people's quality of life better.
You're shaking your head, Andy.
Well, the situation in Brighton is complex. Greens stepped in there where the Labour administration fell apart. And they stepped up and they made some very difficult decisions. And of course, people have punished them maybe for that, but they certainly weren't frightened of doing the right thing there. And
what do you mean the right thing?
Well, making difficult decisions. And certainly in terms of what we're going to try and achieve here, we're not going to shy away from difficult decisions either.
Like what?
Climate change is coming at us like a runaway train. We're doing very, very little to slow it down. And not all growth is good. We talk about growth as though...
You tried telling that, using the kind of climate change stick to beat, a family who's living in a family of 7 people who are living in some kind of, particularly in Brighton Hove, falling down accommodation because you say, we're not allowed to do anything, and certainly we're not allowed to build homes, and certainly we're not allowed to get cheaper energy.
Well, let Andy respond.
There's a reason why that's unpopular, Andy.
We're not going to go around telling people what to do, but if we can make it easier and
What's the point of you being empowered?
and cheaper for us to do the right thing, then people will choose to do it.
Andy, Mellon, thank you very much for joining us to talk about the Green Party's success at the local elections. We're going to talk about something completely different. This headline in the Daily Telegraph: jury-less rape trials will go ahead despite legal boycott, says Scottish Justice Secretary. So it is going to go ahead with the pilot despite the fact that there has been a unanimous boycott by Scottish lawyers highlighting opposition to the plans, which some say impacts the right to a fair trial. Campaigners backing the idea point to the fact that conviction rate for all crimes in Scotland is 91%, whereas for rape it's just 51%. And they're saying that this is partly because juries are badly affected by rape myths and misconceptions. Let's talk to Rape Crisis Scotland's Sandy Brindley. She joins us now. Sandy, unanimous boycott of this by Scottish lawyers. Doesn't that make you pause?
Yeah, so this was a recommendation by Lady Doreen, the second most senior judge in Scotland, that we pilot a judge-led approach to rape trials off the back, as you've referenced, very low conviction rates for rape, but also overwhelming international evidence about the impact of false assumptions that jury members might bring to bear in terms of how they interrogate the evidence in rape trials. I think it maybe has been a little disappointing. The response was seen, I don't know if it's unanimous from the legal profession, but there have been many voices really using quite inflammatory rhetoric in relation to this proposal, whereas what I think we need is a reasoned debate in Scotland about why our justice system fails so many women reporting rape.
Right, I mean, there would be agreement with that point, but do you agree that it is a very drastic step to take? Because having juries is the bedrock of our system here.
I think nobody would dispute it. It is absolutely paramount. The accused in Scotland has a right to a fair trial, but a fair trial does not necessarily mean a jury trial. That I think what we all want is a fair and objective assessment of the evidence being laid in these trials, and I think there's sufficient evidence that that is not happening with juries that really led to Lady Doreen recommending this pilot, and I think it's something we should try and see if it does make a difference. It does not in any way change the presumption of innocence or affect the burden of proof in these cases.
Sandy, stay with us. Ellie, what do you think? Because Labour is saying, you have been saying on the record, rape has effectively been decriminalised in England and Wales. Do you have sympathy with what Sandy is saying and proposing?
I have sympathy, but I don't think we should move to juryless rape trials. I don't, Joe, and let me just explain a little bit why. I think the system is broken, but the problem often relates to what happens much further down the line. So only in England, Wales, only 1.6% of reported rapes result in a charge or summons. So the vast majority of reported rapes result with no action being taken whatsoever. That's a huge problem. There's been a big study by an academic called Professor Cheryl Thomas of all of the cases, rape cases in England of Wales, which actually shows that conviction rates have gone up when the cases actually get before the jury. So it's gone up from 55% in 2007 up to 75% in 2021. So actually, if the cases get before a jury, they are more likely to convict. But the problem is these cases aren't getting to juries. And when they are, victims are waiting 3 to 4 years for their cases to get to court. And that often results in victims pulling out of their cases, an attrition rate of about 41% in rape and serious sexual violence. So there's a huge number of problems that need to be solved. And the government's inaction on this has frankly been shameful. But I don't think that jury list trials is the right solution to the problem.
Bob, do you think it's worth giving a go, trying it, as Sandy says?
Well, they're welcome to try it, but I'm very wary about losing the jury system because it's been with us for centuries. Actually, the government, as you know, has had conducted a rape review, and the government has taken specific measures. So to say that the government is inactive is simply not true.
Well, it's improved very slightly just recently.
No, I mean, look, there are some complex issues here. One is, in part because of COVID, but in part because of the time it takes to bring people to justice, the critical thing is to get rape victims to stay within the criminal justice system. So that has been one of the focuses of government. It's to get video evidence, to use video evidence, which is now happening. As a result of these and other measures, there's a doubling of rape referrals by the CPS, and from a low base, there is a tripling of convictions. So we are heading in the right way. But the way to deal with this, if there are rape myths that people on juries believe, it is to challenge those myths, either using the judge at the beginning of a case or society. You look at a police force like the Isle of Wight. We just to say very briefly,
because we haven't got long.
Domestic violence was something that was underdealt with 20 years ago. It is now the #1 police task on the island and in many other parts of Britain as well.
Right. I mean, are you persuaded in any way by the idea, Charlotte?
I'm not. I agree with Ellie. I think that, to be honest, rape in this country has become all but legal. That rate of charge and summons, it's just ridiculous. It's less than 2 in 100 cases just don't even get to a court. And that is the thing that needs fixing, really.
And you don't want to change in any radical way to look at a pilot like this, would you?
No, it's an incredible slandering of the Scottish public to suggest that they are incapable of coming to a trial like this and being on a jury and giving someone a fair trial. I'd completely reject that. I imagine most people in Scotland would
let me
as well.
let me just get Sandy to answer that. What do you say to Ella on that point?
Yes, I think we're not necessarily talking about prejudice. I think there is no doubt there is some prejudice. There's prejudice in the Scottish population, which the jury pool is drawn from. So it would be naive to think that there aren't sexist
do you have for
attitudes,
that?
for example. But I do think in the main the issue is false assumptions about rape that jury members are bringing to bear on the decision making. So, for example, assumptions about fighting back or physical injury, and that is the issue that's been played out. And that there is particular issues with conviction rates in single complainer rape cases. So that the figures quoted from Cheryl Thomas's research, I do think need further interrogation because they include the rape of children and where there's multiple complainers. What we're looking at in Scotland is a pilot for single complainer rape cases where we know the conviction rate is much lower.
Right. Are you surprised by the fact, I mean, no one on this panel agrees or supports the idea. You've said, and we've talked about a sort of unanimous boycott, or certainly a lot of people in the legal profession in Scotland. Are you surprised by the wealth of opposition to what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the legal profession, it's very much the defence bar is opposed to this, and the defence bar's job is, of course, to get their client acquitted. But I hope that we can have a reasoned discussion in Scotland about how to improve justice for rape survivors. I don't think this is the only solution. That the points that your panel have made have been really valid about the barriers to cases getting to court in the first place, the delays. So we definitely need to increase the procedural justice, the experience of the process.
That's a
But unless we
point.
look at the issue of jury attitudes, we are not going to improve substantive justice, which is an actual outcome to the
All right,
court case.
Sandy Brindley, thank you very much. We've only got 20 seconds left. You're not persuaded at all.
I want to see specialist rape courts. I think that will solve more of the issues.
And you aren't either. So we're going to leave it there. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me and keeping me company. I'll be back tomorrow with Politics UK at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the BBC iPlayer. Bye-bye.
Boom. There we go. Works out. Sorry, had to change my mic. Whatever. Better late than never, I suppose. Oh, don't get me started on fucking housing. Jesus. Really? Bloody housing again. Just build fucking houses. Useless cunts. Back later with question time. I think it's about 10:30. Something like that. 10:40. Which is not far away, actually. So I will see you then.